Welcome to Green Building Matters, the podcast that matters for green building professionals. Learn insight in green buildings as we interview today's experts in LEED and WELL. We'll learn from their career paths, war stories, and all things green, because green building matters. And now our host, and yes, he has every LEED and WELL credential. Here's Charlie Cicchetti.
Be sure to check out the Green Building Matters community, where you can have unlimited exam prep for any of the professional credential exams you're tackling next, as well as putting your continuing education on autopilot, saving time with GBS reporting your hours on your behalf. Check it out, gbes.com/join. Now, enjoy this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. In this interview, we talk to Mary Davidge of Google, and we get into some sustainability best practices that her and her team are implementing, and really some of the workplace changes that have happened up and down Silicon Valley, and then been doing that work at Google. So, hi, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Cicchetti, and today we have Mary Davidge with Google. She's the Director of Real Estate and Workplace Services at Google. Can't wait to talk a little more about not just her LEED Fellow, being named a Living Building Challenge hero, but just what's happening in the workplace with sustainability. So, Mary, thanks for joining us today.
I'm happy to, Charlie. Happy to be here.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. And thanks for making the time. I'm really excited about this talk. But always, for all my guests, where'd you get your start? So where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school? Why don't we start there?
So I grew up in California. I'm a fifth generation Californian.
Wow.
My mother was born in Oakland, and my father was born in Northern California. And so I was brought up on a cattle ranch there, which I really think is why I love nature so much and why I've kind of taken the path that I have.
You know, it's interesting, that appreciation. Several of my guests, they've had that. They either grew up in a rural area or just that early, hey, my family would just take us on these camping trips, or just that early appreciation. So I love it. And as I understand it, you've been in California most of your career. I know in a little while we'll talk about how you've done a lot of architecture in Silicon Valley. So where'd you go to school, and was there an aha moment for sustainability, and when did that happen?
Well, I honestly think my aha moment for sustainability happened when I was a child, and really just because of the way that my family approached our life. Everything about the environment was important because it was our livelihood. So making it last for generations was, and to be able to support our family for generations, which is part of the way that I grew up. That being said, I was really drawn to it. I was drawn to it early. I started actually as an art major and as a painting major. And I went to San Jose State right here in the Valley. It was kind of one of those lucky things. But I quickly shifted to industrial design and interior design once I got there, because I was just fascinated by that. And as it turned out, I've been doing this for a few decades now. As it turned out, when I graduated, the tech industry was just really taking off here. And this was actually in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I ended up working for a small architectural and interiors practice here, and then eventually became a partner in a larger regional firm in the South Bay and the Silicon Valley. Really had the opportunity to work with so many tech clients, all of the major tech clients over time: Apple, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, eBay, Yahoo. And I was continually really drawn to larger scale projects, more complex projects. I love the pace and the innovation in the tech industry. However, I also always just felt like what was being built here was not sustainable, and it was challenging. So sometimes really challenging. So in the late 90s, I decided to leave the architectural firm that I was in. I was leading their office here in San Jose at that point, and to start my own practice in sustainability. My motto was to work at the intersection of health, design, and nature. And as luck would have it, Google was my first client in the early 2000s, really, when I left and started my practice. And so I worked as a consultant to Google in design and sustainability for 10 years. And then in 2014, I became the director of global design in the real estate org. So my whole career, many decades now, has been here in the Valley. And I really feel like now I'm doing a little bit of everything I learned in different parts of my career over the last 40 years. And I'm not ready to stop yet.
No, I can hear the energy, and gosh, what a great place to be. I couldn't imagine those companies, just rapid growth, and you mentioned it, innovation. So one follow-up there, Mary, would be, say some of the designs you were working on in the late 80s, maybe 90s, early 2000s, when you had your own firm too. Just, was there an energy efficiency focus? Was there a sustainability focus? LEED really didn't come online till about 2000. So what was the conversation like? Was it just, I need a building as fast as possible because I'm hiring 500 people? Or what was the driver there with some of your design?
Well, not very, actually in the 90s was when we started working on larger end user owned campuses.
Okay, campuses, yeah.
Because earlier than that, really most of the buildings were quick, tilt up, developer built and owned and then leased buildings. And even Google, when I first started with them, all of their buildings basically were leased. They did not own any building. So it was, frankly, butts and seats. Get people into the building as quickly as possible, make it as flexible as possible. These were kind of the early days of open plan. And so there were a lot of kind of efficiency measures in terms of the way that the spaces functioned for people. I feel like I learned a lot through that process, but there was not a lot of concern about the efficiency early on. There was not a lot of concern about the efficiency of the building. So you're going to ask me, I know, Charlie, about mentors that I have, but in the mid-90s, really, there were two mentors, and one of them was Bill McDonough. The other one was John Igoe. John is here at Google now, but he was really an early real estate innovator and cares deeply about sustainability. He hired Bill McDonough and the firm I was in, RMW, to work on a campus for Palm. That campus was never built, but the principles that we together worked on, really led by Bill McDonough, I could not turn back after that. I knew it was right. I knew it was, part of the values that I had always believed in, but it was not something that you saw a lot in the typical projects here in the Valley. I mean, there were some and people cared about it, but it was also kind of a rough and tumble time where you didn't stay in space very long. It was sometimes 2 or 3 years at most, and then it would get turned over. So it wasn't the highest priority. But as the tech companies started building their own campuses, and also I think kind of a new generation of leadership came in, it became more and more important. Yeah, and I would just also say that in late 2003, early 2004, when Google really started talking about what they would do in the future, it was clear to me that generation of leadership had a deeper understanding of and concern for the environment than many of the clients I had worked with in the past. So I found that I felt like it was an inspiration to me as well.
Wow, I'm blown away, yeah. And those campuses, you're right, now they're all scattered up and down Silicon Valley, and that just made sense from not just a real estate decision, but you can control your sustainability. I mean, so much sustainability is not just waiting on, national politics or state and city mandates, but, what's important to your company and your own internal sustainability mandates. So I love to see what's happening on all the campuses where you are. So you've mentioned some mentors along the way. How about just some of your proudest achievements if you look back on the highlight reel? Mary, what stands out?
It's so interesting that you asked me that question, because I feel so fortunate because I have just loved my entire career. I can't ever think really of a day that I have been bored. So I'm proudest of, I think, the most recent achievements. And when I came to Google initially, what I joined and what I helped to start actually was Google's first real estate green team, which was our responsibility was health and sustainability, because Google sees those as being just as linked together, which was very much in line with my own values. So I feel like the initiatives that we started in the early, to mid 2000s, 2000 probably 4 through 2010, things like Google's Healthy Materials program, our biophilia guidelines, our IEQ guidelines, our early master plans for North Bayshore that incorporated habitat restoration. I'm really proud that I could participate and help to lead some of that, because now that work is foundational to the campuses that we're building. And definitely, I think over my career, the Charleston East and Bayview campuses that are now under construction will probably, I can't imagine topping it. We have a number of campuses that are in design right now. But those projects, I was able to participate from the selection of the architect through guiding the selection of the other consultants, guiding the design of these campuses. And they do many of those things. Charleston East will be 600,000 feet. And we believe we're going to achieve the Living Building Challenge Healthy Materials pedal. So just being able to see that Healthy Materials program come to fruition in that project makes me really happy. Bayview, we're pretty certain we're going to get to net zero water on that project. And the way that it was done through stormwater ponds, using a geothermal pile system, restoring the wetlands and water reuse, and also connecting. The wetlands are so beautiful, and our industry hasn't really interfaced with the Bay very much, but this campus and the way that you look out upon restored wetlands and restored habitat, I think is going to be extraordinarily beautiful. So I'm really proud of those achievements.
Oh, rightfully so. It sounds like you've just done so much there, even just in the last few years. And I'm sure if you added up the last 30, it's a very long list. So let's unpack a little bit of that. On some projects, maybe you'll go for some of the certifications, maybe LEED or WELL, or you mentioned some pedals. So there's some good guidance out there and best practices. But it sounds like you do have several programs internally that, is it safe to say, are more important that you meet? Yeah,
so here's what we do. I should also say that I am very grateful to LEED, and I am proud to be a LEED fellow, because LEED to me has been, for our development projects, we're typically targeting LEED Platinum. And I believe Bayview and Charleston East are going to achieve that. So I never wanted us, and Anthony Ravitz, who was the co-developer of the original Google Real Estate Green Team, we agreed if there is a system in place that aligns with Google's values, we should use that system. And LEED was one of those systems, as was in some cases the Living Building Challenge, but more typically LEED. And we've used WELL to some degree too. However, if our need to get in alignment with what our founders' principles are, for instance, in healthy materials, when we started it, there wasn't a system that was as rigorous as what we needed to do. Mm. So we did have to develop our own. And the same is true of our IEQ guidelines and our biophilia guidelines. They're just, at the time when we started, there wasn't that guidance available for teams. But it is much easier to leverage systems that are aligned with your principles. And I really, really don't encourage developing your own if there's a system that already works for you.
Sure. No, thank you for painting the picture there. That just makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about materials. As I understand it, you were an early advocate on the health product declaration side of things. So what do we need to know about the materials that were put in some of your build outs and buildings? Like, what's most important to you on the material side? Well,
now there are really some great certifications for materials, and I think the HPD is definitely, and Cradle to Cradle definitely so helpful in that regard. I would say in the early days, it was really challenging because this was even before Living Building Challenge. So HBN was someone that we really turned to. And when Cradle to Cradle came along, we used them and we continue to use them. What I would say is that the push is always just for transparency and education and really understanding what is in the material and the level of transparency that a manufacturer is able to provide continues to be really important to us to this day. I still believe that we are kind of on the tip of the iceberg of this issue, because I think over time, what we're going to learn is that when you start to really look at this holistically and see how, I think that technology is going to help us to be able to track what materials are in a building, how they actually impact indoor environmental quality, how they impact our cognitive performance. But I think first, you just have to know what's in them. And then over time, we're going to learn more about what the impact of that is.
Thank you. Thank you for that. What else is keeping you busy today?
Well, mainly today, what we're working on is my team is responsible for setting design intent. And so consequently, design principles, making sure that there's clarity about what we're trying to achieve in our development projects and in our interiors projects. So I'm really, because we're growing and our real estate portfolio is growing, I'm continually working on trying to develop guidance so that these large, complex, integrated teams have the right guidance for the campuses that we're building and the districts that we're developing, mainly in the Bay Area, but there are some others around the world as well, as you probably know.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So let's pretend we had a crystal ball, Mary. Where do you think sustainability, this green building movement, shifting next? What should we be reading up on?
I really think that, and this is my hope, that being able to look at not only the built environment and sustainability in buildings, but also social sustainability and being able, and the whole ecology and the environmental issues. I think that I'm hopeful that we're smart enough that we begin to look at this as a system, as a system and understand the dependencies and the interdependencies of these systems. Because I think that getting big picture like this and really kind of getting above the day-to-day, all of these things are important, the small strategies that we use, but I feel like we have to take a broader approach. And I really do, I'm very hopeful because I see young architects, designers, and engineers who are coming in the field today. They are able to think that way. I also, of course, being here, I really believe that there's a lot that AI will do for us in the future in terms of being able to help us to predict whether or not, to be able to evaluate a lot of different options, put a lot of different criteria in, and to predict whether or not the buildings and the places that we're designing are going to have the right level of impact. So I would say kind of the short version of that is to be able to find tools and resources and ways of looking at it that are just much more holistic and much more kind of systems thinking than we've been able to do in the past. And I think that's going to help us to move much faster, which is what we have to do to solve the problems ahead of us.
That's really exciting. I'm very hopeful too. There's a fun fact I like to share that 37% of those going for a LEED credential right now, Mary, are in high school or college. So a lot of LEED professionals coming out into the job force. But what I heard is systems thinking and AI is going to help our green buildings. So that's very exciting. What would you say is your specialty? What are you really good at? Maybe if you were to ask someone else in your peer network, what would they say? What are you really good at?
I think I am good at understanding understanding a challenge or a design problem, and then defining a vision and the principles, the high-level vision that will help to solve that problem, establishing a true north, But then I actually think my greatest talent is hiring people that are smarter than I am, helping them to work well together, and kind of then getting out of their way.
I love that. All right. So we always hear that Google might have some tough questions. So what do you look for in a good hire, Mary, someone to join your team? You mentioned someone that's smarter than you, but what does that look like? What do you look for? You said definitely the humble and the smart side of things, but what else?
Did I say humble?
Maybe you didn't. I said humble. Sorry. You said something.
Well, Charlie, you hit the nail on the head, because I think that I'm looking for people who are willing to be collaborative, who are really, really intelligent, but have kind of a curiosity and a humbleness about them, so that they're willing to work collaboratively with others and not have to think that every idea is their own, or that they're the star. Because the problems that we're trying to solve today, just like I was talking earlier about system thinking, they're too big for any one person to solve. So I really look for smart people that want to be part of something greater than themselves.
I like how you explain that. Thank you. That's very exciting. So do you have any routines or rituals, any habits? You could share some pro tips, Mary? What keeps you on point?
Okay. Well, I get in nature as much as I possibly can. Okay. I just came back from 2 weeks at our cabin near Mount Lassen in Northern California, and it just absolutely helps me to get more clear about what's important and to continue to enjoy my work as well as I have. I'm also a great believer in exercise and meditation and eating well and just keeping yourself and you're in the best shape that you can.
Absolutely. No, those are great. And so do you ever get back to the farm? Is the farm still in the family, or you said you get up to a cabin in Northern California?
Yeah.
That's your escape route.
No, we don't have the ranch anymore. My parents have both passed away, but we do have this cabin in a little kind of a small group of cabins near Mount Lassen, where my family has been going for 99 years. Next year will be our 100th year. So completely off the grid, no cell, no electricity, but it's great to do that. Yes, so I do.
Fantastic. Yeah. Mary, I'm a fan of the bucket list. There are one or two things on your bucket list, maybe some adventure, some travels, still a book to write. Not sure. What's on the bucket list?
Probably not a book to write. No, probably not a book. Maybe someday I'll do a blog. It's actually, there are several places that I've been before that I want to go back to. I really, really, we went to Peru I love to travel. I love to see great places. I love to kind of understand the energy of a place. I would like to spend some time again in South Africa. I would love to spend more time in Peru. We went to Scotland last year, and I would love to go back there to kind of the northern parts of the more remote northern parts of Scotland. So mainly, I think my bucket list always includes travel to interesting places, both remote places and interesting cities. So those would be on my bucket list.
That's definitely good for the bucket list. So just a couple more things here, Mary. Books. I'm not sure if you like to listen to books or pick up a good hard copy or maybe you read some publications, but is there a book or two you'd recommend?
I love to read, and I'm reading right now a book by Robin Wall Kimmerer entitled Braiding Sweetgrass. And it was perfect while I was kind of offline over the last couple of weeks. She is a Native American, but she's also a scientist. And I have this belief that you have to kind of combine magic with real data and engineering. And she does that. I mean, she talks about the indigenous native ways and the languages that they use to describe nature. But then she also weaves it in, this idea of braiding, with science and why those things impact us. So I loved it just because I think that old saying that we honor and protect what we love. And she gives some logic for why we love it. And then the second one that I just finished, and people around here are getting tired of me talking about it, is Joyful by Ingrid Fattel-Lee, about the joy, how you create joyfulness in our places. And it just fascinated me, again, kind of with the combination of art and science. So I highly recommend those two.
Oh, wow. Well, we're going to put the links to those 2 books. They sound amazing in the show notes here for the podcast. So, Mary, you've had an excellent career in this green building movement. You still have a ton of energy around it, and you've got a team behind you that you're accomplishing quite a bit. So let's rewind, though. Say you wish you had some career advice a little earlier, something you know now. What is something you wish you'd have known earlier? And do you have any words of encouragement for someone just now jumping into the green building movement?
Well, another author I really love is Brene Brown. She has a number of TED Talks as well. But I read a book by her recently, and I thought, oh man, I wish I would have known this when I was younger. And it is really to know what is important to you. She has a little exercise in there where you go through like 100 words, and you pick through this exercise, you pick the top 2 that are your values and represent your values and principles. And this kind of surprised me, but I came down to these 2 words, love and courage. And I think that if you find the work you love and then have the courage to answer the call, you will have a happy and successful career. And I wish I would have known that in my 20s, just a little more knowledge of what was important to me.
Oh, well, it's fantastic advice. And I think you've inspired those listening, whether they've been going at this for a while or just now getting going. You've gone through a few different career pivots. Clearly, you've had an amazing run here and just really proud to have you on the podcast. So, Mary, Google, just want to say thank you for being on the podcast today.
Thank you, Charlie. It's been my pleasure. It's been very fun. I just have to say, this is a great business, and I encourage anyone young that's listening to this to jump into it if they have the passion for it.
Yeah, I think that it's, some might think that it's a little late to join the green building movement, as we call it, but I think you would agree, no, it's just kind of ramping up. Some of us just got a little bit of a head start, but no, it's ramping up and it's going in a few different directions. So it's exciting. I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.